Firearms manufacturing is such an interesting business, and I've talked to so many people over the years. What comes to mind today is the pre-64 Model 70, which we've talked about before, and I guess people have been talking about it ever since Winchester decided to change it in 1964. And the way the story goes, and of course everybody has a different version of the story, I guess the accounting department decided that the profit margins weren't good enough to continue manufacturing the pre-64 Model 70. So the board, or whoever it was that made decisions, I'm assuming the board, had a meeting and felt, well, things have been going so smoothly and we've got a really good line of rifles and we've got to do something about this. Let's hire a bunch of engineers that know less or very little about firearms and put out a rifle that's completely inferior and discontinue the pre-64 Model 70. Now maybe that's humorous to you, maybe it's not. As a gun person, of course it's a little bit funny to me to get rid of the pre-64 Model 70. I don't know what decision making was at work. I suppose the accountants were correct. The profit margin just wasn't good enough to keep making the pre-64. Anyway, that's sort of a preamble leading up to the Ruger Model 77, and I had lots of requests which I kind of put in my back pocket because I didn't have an early Ruger 77 with the Tang safety. It was easy to get a Hawkeye, so I've got them both on the table today. And then quite a few people asked me what's my favorite Ruger. I'm writing everybody. There's messaging that you can see, there's messaging you can't see, and then there are emails and things like that. Anyway, I'll just try to get to the subject. We got a lot of stuff on the table today. I took apart these rifles as I usually do, and I took apart a couple more. I wanted to show you the difference between a Ruger 77 Hawkeye and even a Tikka T3, or I had a Frankie on the table. Anyway, I had to put away some of the guns. It was just too much to go through on one video, and it's probably tough enough enduring my videos as it is. But getting to the point, here's the pre-64 Model 70. Everybody knows how great this action is and was. They're still in demand. The price is still going up. This is a $243. And I won't go into the details, but when this was discontinued and replaced by the post-64 Model 70, the post-64, there's nothing wrong with it. It's an excellent rifle. Unfortunately, the Remington 700 came out before the post-64 Model 70. And so people realized, well, Winchester just decided to abandon the controlled round feed of the pre-64 and all the machining operations that resulted in the accountants saying this is too expensive to manufacture. And they put out a post-64 rifle that was very similar to the Remington Model 700. And when I say that, I'm speaking broadly. There were differences. But for the general public, it seemed as if Remington and Winchester were maybe offering the same products. Now, I don't know that to be exactly true as regards why the Ruger Model 77 came out, but I do know that Bill Ruger liked traditional rifles, and he knew that the economics of making the pre-64 Model 70 were probably out of date. And as a consequence, the board maybe made the right decision. They couldn't make that action at that time with the tooling they had profitably. So Ruger, or Bill, decided he could make a rifle that was very similar, and I'm going to show you how similar in a moment, without all the machining, by way of investment castings. And investment castings, you can Google this, it's an ancient process, which really is originally the lost wax process. You make the object that you want to ultimately have out of wax, and then replace the wax, which is why they call it lost wax casting, because the wax is lost. You replace the wax with steel, and you can make very complex forms with that method. So for the camera department. Now here's what we're looking at. This is the pre-64 Model 70 over here. I'll try to get it shift over to this side. And magazine box, trigger guard, floor plate, spring, follower. I put this here. This is just a Mauser action, which it's actually a Siamese Mauser. And then 3 screws. So to review again, the pre-64 action, the bolt, this is controlled round feed. It's got 2 lugs. It's got a very simple and excellent trigger, magazine box, trigger guard, floor plate. This is all steel. And it might surprise you. I mean, this is the Ruger. Here's the magazine box. Here's the trigger guard. A couple of screws. Bill Ruger felt that this was a big deal to make sure that this screw goes in at a diagonal to pull the floor plate assembly and action, because the screw goes in here at an angle to pull it all together. You can study that on your own. Magazine box. And then the action and trigger. I mean, if you didn't know much about guns, you'd say, well, these are very similar. The pre-64 Model 70 and the Ruger 77. Of course, they're not really that similar. There are definite differences. One of them is the tang safety, which is right here. And this model was the original 77. I had one with a slightly different bolt handle, and you gun experts out there, you'll see that this is probably a few years after the 77 came out. The original bolt handle was different. I can't say that the 77 bolt handle is nicer than the pre-64 Model 70. This is the pre-64 here. I mean, I actually think the pre-64 Model 70 keeps going up for a reason. Winchester got just about everything right with the pre-64. But anyway, that's another subject, and books have been written. So the casting for the Model 77 original version goes from here to here. Then you've got the tang safety. You've got a trigger mechanism. The triggers tended to be good. The barrels were, I felt, very good. Some people say they have bad experiences, and Bill Ruger never liked it that people had to buy a base and then buy rings. So there's a dovetail feature in here, which you all know. And Ruger rings, I've always liked them. They simplify scope mounting. The rings are steel. They're probably investment castings as well. And if you want to read about investment casting, which I invite you to do, I think his plant was called Evergreen Castings. And you've got to have a look at the ingenuity. And of course, Bill Ruger first made the .44 Magnum semi-automatic rifle. Thought I mentioned that. And then went on to the Model 77. There are some things that you'll notice. This is the recoil lug on the Model 77. And then here's the recoil lug on the Model 70, pre-64. You can see quite a difference there. And then, just for fun, here's the Mauser, which is very similar to the Model 70 pre-64. Anyway, I don't know what that all means, but the main point of the video actually was to compare the early Model 77 with the tang safety to the Hawkeye. This always falls out. That's the linkage between the safety button and the mechanism itself. Here's the Hawkeye, and I don't know, you can probably spot some differences. There aren't that many. I suspect there's a lot of manufacturing shortcuts and improvements, let's call them profitability improvements in the Hawkeye. The safety is simplified. The casting is shortened. You don't have to have a tang. Here's the magazine box for the Hawkeye. I'll put it next to the magazine box for this original 77. Here's the trigger guard. We can put those together. So Hawkeye, original 77. And then here's magazine and floor plate. So I mean, for gun people, you may see massive differences. For non-gun people, they would say the Hawkeye is very similar, and it is, to the original 77. A lot of people say the Hawkeye has a better trigger, and maybe it does. I never have problems. I never had a problem with either trigger, and I'll flip this over. You can see the bolt here, and then you can see the bolt here. Now these are both cocked actions, but that's academic. Anyway, some people ask me, do I like the Ruger? Well, I think the Ruger is one of those rifles that has been around so long that we just take it for granted. These are superb rifles. By the way, here's the stock for the Hawkeye and for the original 77. And you can see they got rid of some bulk. You can take a look at the fore ends. This is the original model, and this is slimmed down. Now this is long after Bill Ruger moved to the happy hunting grounds, but he was always influenced by British gun design. I think that's well documented. And there's so much wood on most stocks that's just not needed. If you want to simplify manufacture, of course, then you leave the wood in place and try to make it look good. But the Hawkeye has probably a superior stock. And I can tell you a funny, a crazy story on the Ruger 77. I don't know, I must have been 20 something. And I bought a 77 in 270, which is the same as this rifle here. That's a 270, that's a 243 in the pre-64. And this is a 35 Whelen, which is one of my favorite kind of universal cartridges. Anyhow, I was out with the 270, and it was one of those crazy situations. I was hunting whitetails with my brother, and the way stuff unfolds when you're hunting, it's all unpredictable, which is probably one of the why we go hunting. Anyway, there was a coyote running at 300 yards or something, and I didn't even think about it. I just raised the rifle, and coyotes, everything was legal. I had all the whatever permits, or I guess they didn't need permits, but I don't remember. Anyway, I fired and got the coyote, which was an astounding shot. And then after a long walk through deep snow, I get to the coyote and he's got a collar on. So, oh my goodness, you feel really bad. And so, yeah, several $100s of compensation later and many apologies. I felt terrible. I still feel terrible. But I don't know what that dog was running around in the field, and even the people that attended, because law enforcement was involved, said this dog looks like a coyote. So there were, it amounted to nothing except a really bad thing. But the rifle at 300 yards running, I don't even know if I had scope. Maybe I did, but yeah, it was one of those times where I wished I had missed, but I didn't. Anyway, that's my main recollection with the 270 Ruger Model 77. And then some of you were asking me, what do I think is the best Ruger 77? Easy answer. Bill Ruger liked the Mannlicher Schönauer carbines, and he came up with this model, which is the RSI. This is the original one with the tang safety. It's in 308, and I mean, this has to be one of the most elegant, fast handling bolt actions ever. These are just so slick, and I can't say there's a difference, and maybe they still make a Hawkeye RSI. I hope they do. I don't study these things. A lot of you do and tell me about it, which is great. But this to me is the ultimate 77. It just is a perfect rifle, and in 308, I'm probably going to have to do something this fall. I probably have 6 or 7 rifles to take hunting, which means a lot of traveling because you can't do that much hunting in one area. But that to me is one of the finest bolt action rifles ever made, and it has, the original Ruger has the push button release for the floor plate. The Hawkeye is a little bit simpler, again for probably profit reasons, but it works fine. And as you know, I like the iron sights, and this one has perfect sights, so I can spin this off, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's blowing snow or the lenses are jammed or whatever goes wrong with scopes. Sometimes you just can't stand looking through them anymore. Then I have the regular sights. So I hope I covered the subject. I'm sure I missed things, I always do, but there it is, a Ruger 77. Like I said, I had the newer guns out. I had Remington 783, a Tikka T3, all in pieces so you could look and compare, but all it does is make you feel bad about the modern rifles. There's just no comparison. I don't work for Ruger, but before they discontinued these, I thought Bill Ruger would think it's ironic that the 77 will probably disappear just like the pre-64 Model 70, and we'll be all running around the bush with these polymer things with almost no good parts. These are fantastic. Thank you very much for watching, and please have a look at the Instagram pictures I put up when I can, and join me on Patreon. It's always hard for me to remember all these things I'm supposed to do at the end of these videos. But you take care out there. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.